Hello, welcome back. This is chapter 4, the old clock shop, and today I'm going to explain this chapter to you. So here we go. Christmas Eve had arrived. That is, Christmas Eve was around the corner. That is, it was time for the Christmas celebrations, and so as last-minute shoppers were going home, a thick white sheet of snow lay over Salt Lake City, USA. And so the incident or the story here taking place in Salt Lake City, USA. So that is the story is from Salt Lake City, USA, and there, as the shoppers, buyers, those who came out to buy the necessary items, necessary things for the celebration, were returning now because it was quite late at night. So they were returning, and as they were returning, there spread a thick white sheet of snow all over the place in Salt Lake City. Yet the lights were still burning in the old clock shop. Yet, although the shoppers, the buyers were returning home, there the light at Mr. Ray's old clock shop was still burning. The lights were still on at his shop, as Ray, its old, deaf owner, the owner of this old clock shop was Mr. Ray, who was old and deaf as well. He could not hear. Deaf owner worked on a clock he had sold that day. As he was working on the clock, that is, he had sold a clock, and that now he was again counting the money, calculating or counting the money that he had received from buying from selling the clock. Having finished his work, Ray stood up and was on his way to the back room. So he had finished his work. The day was over, so he was returning to his back room. So he stood up and was returning to his back room. That is, at the back of the shop there was his room, when a cold rush of air from the front door hit the back of his neck, and as he was retreating to his back room, there came in cold air as the front door of the shop was open. So there came in cold air, and that hit the back of his neck. He turned to meet a last-minute shopper, but his old wise eyes told him that this was not a shopper. Okay, so as a cold wind hit his neck, so he turned round, that is, he turned about to see who had come, and that is, he turned to see the last-minute shopper, the last shopper of the day. So, but his old wise eyes told him that this was not a shopper, but his old wise eyes, that is, eyes could not be old and wise, but Mr. Ray was old and he was wise as well. Since he was old, so he was very much experienced, so he knew exactly the things. So his eyes told him that he was not a shopper. The person who came in was not a shopper, was not a buyer. He saw two men, one in his 20s, the other closer to 50, and he found there two men coming in. One was in his 20s, that is in the 20s, 20 plus, and other was in his late 40s, that is 46 plus or 45 plus. That is closer to 50. The younger man remained at the door, and out of the two, the younger one, who was in his 20s, remained at the door. He stayed outside the door. The older one approached the counter with no sign of friendliness in his eyes. Out of the two, the older one approached the counter, that is, he came near the counter. Counter is a reception desk. You may call it reception desk, or the furniture for stuffing, for keeping things, or also furniture that works as a divider between the seller and the buyer. Okay, so he came, but there was no sign of friendliness in his eyes. The customer had no sign of friendliness. That is, he was not having any warmth in his eyes. He was not having any kind of, say, sympathy or such feeling that can be related to a friend. Ray was able to hide his growing fear as he slowly pushed a notepad and a pencil across the counter. Mr. Ray was a little scared, a little afraid, because there was no sign of friendliness. That is, there was no sign of warmth, there was no sign of openness in the man's eyes, so he grew a little afraid, and he hid his fear. He concealed, he hid, hid his past of hide. He hid his fear and slowly pushed a notepad and a pencil across the counter, and pushed a notepad and a pencil. Notepad is a pad for writing, and also a pencil so that he could write on it. He smiled at the unfriendly face, then pointed to his ears and shook his head from side to side. So he gave a smile, that is, Mr. Ray gave a smile to the customer. Unfriendly face, that is the customer here. Then pointed to his ears, and with his fingers he pointed to his ears and shook his head from side to side, and he then shook his head, moved his head from one side to the other, meaning that he could not hear a thing. He was deaf. A quick look of surprise changed the man's face. A quick look of surprise. He was surprised. He looked at Mr. Ray, and that was a quick look, and that surprised him. And this change of incident, that he was shy of expressing himself. The customer was shy. He was feeling uneasy expressing himself, and as he found that the shopkeeper was deaf, he could not hear, so there was a kind of relief in the man's eyes, or on his face. So the man's face, and he studied the notepad. So there was change on his face, and then he studied the notepad. He found what was written there on the notepad, then turned and said something to his friend. He found what was written there on the notepad. Then he turned to his friend, who was in his 20s, to say something to him. Ray used the chance to look closely at the man, paying attention to the shape of a gun and a restless hand in the man's right coat pocket. So as the customer turned back and was having a chat with his other friend, so this was an opportunity for Mr. Ray to look him closely. So he looked at his pocket, that his hand was there in the pocket, right coat pocket, that is right side of his coat's pocket, that is his right hand was in his pocket. and he studied the pocket, his hand, say, or his pocket, or that part, and he noticed something something appeared in the shape of gun, and that his hand was restless, and he found that his hand was moving frequently. Anger boiled within him, but it was kept down by an inner voice that said, "Be still." Anger boiled. He got very angry. He was boiling with anger, but he kept down his temper as the inner voice told him to be still, as the conscience, inner conscience, that is his soul, asked him to be still, to be quiet, and not to react. He wrote on the notepad, "May I help you?" Then he wrote on the notepad, that is, Mr. Ray wrote on the notepad, "May I help you? If I can provide you any kind of assistance, any kind of help," written by Mr. Ray. For the first time, the older man looked directly at Ray and smiled. And this is the first time that the older man, that is the customer, looked directly into Mr. Ray's eyes and smiled. A cruel, mocking smile. It was a cruel and mocking smile. The smile was cruel, very hard, very harsh, and mocking was funny. That is, though there was a smile on his face, but that happiness was not reflected of his inner feeling. That is, the customer, had been suffering from inside, but his smile spoke of something else. His smile could not speak of that very thing. They both understood why he was there, why his friend remained at the door. Now both of them realized the real motive of their actions, real motive of their coming to the shop. The one standing at the door, everything was understood by both of them. That is, customer realized the thing about the shopkeeper, and the shopkeeper, Mr. Ray, realized the real intention or the motive of the man, the customer. They looked like men who were down on their luck and were now ready to try something they would later be sorry about. So Mr. Ray realized that they were down on their luck, that they were unlucky, they were not having luck to their side on that special occasion, that is celebration time, and they were having no money. Down on luck means having no money. And so they were ready to try something that they would be sorry about later. They were trying something, they were trying to do something of which they would regret later. So ticked on. Ray calmly wrote another message. The clocks at the shop ticked on. They kept on ticking. They kept on moving. That is, the second hand. The hand of second moved regularly and made a short, sharp sound. So the ticking sound was coming from the clocks, and Ray now calmly wrote another message. He wrote another message on the notepad. "Have you come to pick up a clock or watch?" Now he asked if he had come because there was no response. So he wrote another message. He wrote this time, "Have you come to pick up a clock or watch that if he had got or borrowed money from him and kept some clock or watch as security to him, and that he now had come to take that back. So he wrote that message. Then he pointed to the loan board filled with hanging clocks and pocket watches. And then, after writing that, he pointed to the loan board. That is the board where all the clocks and watches were placed or kept. Those watches, those clocks, which were kept as security by the customers, his customers, and borrowed money from him. He was not a pawnbroker, but now it is to be made clear that Mr. Ray was not a pawnbroker. He was not a person who lent money on interest, higher interest, or any sort of interest. Yes, indeed, he lent money, but without interest, but at the same time couldn't say no to the needy people who placed their old watches or clocks before him for anything they could get. But he was not a pawnbroker. He was not who would lend money for or in exchange of something as security to him. But at the same time, he couldn't say no. But at the same time, he couldn't say no to the needy people, the people with some need, the people who needed money, who placed their old watches or clocks before him, who placed willingly their watches and clocks before him and wanted some money. They could get whatever, anything that they could get. So he was not a pawnbroker, but he was very kind person, so could not say no to people willingly leaving their clocks and watches as security to him. He loaned more than he should. They would be there when the owners wanted them back. And he loaned people, he lent money more than he should. Say, for example, if you leave a watch to him and your watch worth, say 500 rupees, he would lend you 700 to 800 rupees. So that was his nature. He was very helpful. And then he would loan more than they needed, or he should, or they would be there when the owner wanted them back, and they would be there until the owner wanted them back. And when the owner of the particular watch or clock wanted them back and come with the money, he could take it away. Wanted them back at the same price he had paid with no interest, and he could take back his clock or watch at the same price, the same money that he had borrowed from Mr. Ray without any interest. He would charge no interest. That is, he would give money, he would lend money on zero interest. Then the older man seemed to feel a little easier. And now, as he spoke about loan or the clock or the watch, if he had put on security, so he realized that he was keeping things as security and lend money. So he was a little easier. He felt relaxed and easy. Took out his hand from his pocket and quickly looked at the watch on his wrist. And now he took out his right hand from his pocket and looked at his wristwatch on his hand. "How much will you give me for this?" The man wrote. Now the customer wrote on the notepad, how much will you pay me or give me for this watch? Ray noticed a little shame in the gray eyes looking at him. So, as the man expressed his idea, he wanted to sell, or he wanted to keep his wrist watch as security, and want to get some loan from him. So as he expressed these words, this idea, there was shame, he was uneasy, there was shame in his eyes, in his gray eyes, that is, his eyes were gray, and there was shame on them. The watch was nothing special, and yet had great powers. That is, the watch was ordinary, was pretty ordinary, was a normal watch, yet had great powers. Yet the watch had great powers. What powers it was having? It was having the powers to take him, to bring him out of a bad situation. So let's see. Powers. I was something to exchange. It was something to exchange. It had great powers. What powers it was having? It was something to exchange. That is, the watch could at least be exchanged for something. A way out of a bad situation. It was also a way to come out of a bad situation. It was ordinary, bad, was not a trifle, what was not a trash. So, bad situation. Then knowing that, great need had brought the man to his shop. In the first place, Ray asks, how much do you need for it? Since this man was, say, in great difficulty, was in great trouble, and knowing Mr. Ray knew that only the difficulty, only the trouble of his life brought him to his shop and brought him to such a situation that he was forced to say keep his watch for security. So Mr. Ray asked him how much did he need, how much did he want, how much was his requirement, because it was celebration time, and since Mr. Ray was kind, so he wanted him to ask for the amount he needed. The reply came back on the notepad, whatever its word, and he wrote on the notepad whatever its word, that is, whatever is the word of this watch, whatever this watch can fetch. Ray reached into his cash box. Now he reached into cash box, that is, he extended his hand and reached that opened his cash box, pulled out a $50 note and passed it into the man's hand. Then from the cash box he took out a $50 note and passed it into man's hand, that is, gave it to, or the man thrust it into the man's hand. As they shook hands, Ray looked into the man's eyes. They seemed to say thanks, and as they shook hands, so they exchanged the things. Final exchange was done, so the man, being pleased, shook hands with Mr. Ray, and Ray looked into man's eyes, and he looked into the eyes of that man and his eyes seemed to say thanks to him. They both knew the watch wasn't worth that much. Both of them knew it very well that the watch was not worth that much. That is, the value of the watch was not $50. Before turning to leave, the man wrote, "I will be back to pick it up as soon as I can. Merry Christmas." And before he left the shop, before he turned to leave the shop, he wrote on the notepad, "I will be back to pick it up as soon as I can." That is, he wrote that he would come back to pick up the watch as soon as possible. As early as possible, he would be returning to him, coming to him, and getting the watch back. And then he wished him Merry Christmas. The little story ended on the half hour with the clocks striking all together. This little story, or this little incident that took place between the shop owner, Mr. Ray, and the customer, lasted only for 30 minutes. Their interaction, their talks, their exchanges lasted only for half an hour. Within half an hour, the story got over. And when the story got over, when the exchanges were done, all the clocks together struck. That is, say it was 9 o'clock, and so all the clocks struck together, and that was also an indication that it was over, and that the dealing was good dealing. That was the best dealing, and even the clocks appreciated the deal. The timepieces, which had been looking on silently all the while, rang out the time with such feeling that even Ray thought he could hear them. All the timepieces, clocks and watches, all of them had been quietly and silently observing all the happenings that took place between the two. And when it was over, when the exchange was over and it indicated a happy ending, all the timepieces rang together, all of them sounded together, indicating that even they were happy, even they expressed their happiness and appreciation towards this deal. And even Ray thought that he could hear them. He could hear those clocks and watches and their appreciation. The sweet musical message was filled with hope, and the message was full of hope for the mankind. The timeless message of peace on earth, goodwill towards all, was felt by the three men who stood in the old clock shop, and the timeless message, the message that was presented by the story, the message of peace on earth, that there should be peace, there should be brotherhood, there should be goodwill, good thoughts, good feeling towards other, was felt by all of them, all the three. Those who stood there, that is, all the three people, all the three men there. So the story ended on a happy note, and this is a message for all the humanity, that we must help others who are in distress, who are in need, who are in difficulty. So this is all, and with this we have come to the end of the chapter as well. Thank you.